A new tactic to stop violent crime in Detroit, plus pricey living downtown. Also tonight, soccer in the city and a new radio show that has everyone talking. Stay put. MiWeek starts right now.
Did you know Roush Enterprises was selected by Google to assemble a test fleet of 100 prototype self-driving cars in 2015? It also produced the new Domino's delivery cars. And speaking of Domino's, Domino's sells well over 2 million pizzas per day around the world, and half of their sales are digital. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.
And welcome to MiWeek. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. It is a problem that Detroit is having a very difficult time fighting, and we're talking about violent crime in the city. Now, Police Chief James Craig is trying a new approach, one that he says has worked in other cities. The new initiative will have police and residents working together to stop the violence. So coming up just ahead for you tonight, we will talk about the chief's new plan and what impact it will have. And we'll hear from the chief himself about the relationship between his officers and Detroit residents. Also coming up tonight, housing prices are skyrocketing in downtown and in Midtown Detroit. Will it spread to other parts of the city? We'll take a look at that. Plus, Detroit could soon have a Major League Soccer team playing in a downtown stadium. We will debate whether that's a good idea and the location that some people want for it. And you'll never believe who's getting a radio show. That story and more in tonight's headlines. But we do start with the fight against crime. Detroit Police James Craig says it is time to save the kids. In just the past month, 3 children were shot in the city. The chief is calling on community groups and ministers now to work with police to help bring the criminals to justice. And that is where we begin with our MiWeek contributors tonight. Nolan Finley of the Detroit News, Stephen Henderson of the Detroit Free Press. Gentlemen, it's good to see you. So let's get right in on this. Nolan, what is different about the chief's plan now that we haven't seen before in stopping the violence?
Well, it fits into what he's been saying since he got here, really, that police alone are not going to solve the violent crime problem in Detroit. This has to be a community-wide effort, and there has to be a measure of intolerance, if you will, on part of the citizens that we're not going to take this anymore. You have had now 3 children shot in the same West Side neighborhood, intentionally shot. The 6-month-old, the 3-year-old, and then the little fellow over the weekend who was wounded. These are people who are intentionally shooting children, and it's, sounds very much like gang activity, although the chief didn't say that. And folks know who these people are. They just have been terrified to say anything because they're not sure the police can protect them. This has to be a community mobilization. You can't have little kids shot in your city at this rate, and you can't have people out there targeting children. It's unacceptable.
So is Chief Craig saying now that we can protect you in the neighborhood, who will step forward and tell us who these people are?
I think that's part of his goal, right, is to get people to trust more that that saying something won't invite a retaliation on themselves or on their family. But I think the other part here that he's trying to push on is that there has to be some sort of change, some sort of cultural change in these neighborhoods about what's okay and what's not. And there are many reasons that crime happens the way it happens in Detroit. There are a lot of drivers behind it. But one of them is this sense of anything goes, this sense of recklessness among the perpetrators that is different than it used to be 10 or 15 or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I mean, there's no question that anyone who grew up in a neighborhood in Detroit knows that things were different in the 70s and 80s, which was not any sort of garden spot. in the city. I mean, it was a really violent place then, and these same kinds of things did not happen. So something is different about what people are willing to do, and I think the chief is trying to get people to focus on that as well. That's a super complicated problem that doesn't have like an easy button push solution, but I think it's something we ought to be focused on.
Right, and it's not something that you can do in the short term. So he's saying now he wants to work with community groups and he wants to work with ministers now. But what's the fine line, Nolan, between saying, all right, you need to take back your neighborhoods and you need to help us out, between being vigilant and vigilante justice?
You know, I don't know that there is any lines at this point when you have little babies getting shot in their front yard. I think if you think of the horror of a mother having to pick a baby up who's been shot and put that baby in a car and drive it to the hospital because you can't wait for EMS to get there, I'm not sure there's any lines at all that should stop people from protecting their children and protecting their neighborhoods. This is a level of inhumanity I think we've not seen in this city before, when you can look down the barrel of a gun and see a child and still pull the trigger.
But wait a minute. So let me have you answer that then, what I asked Nolan. Is there a fine line between community helping out and helping out police, and then crossing the line into vigilante justice? Because do you think the chief wants that?
No, of course not. He doesn't want people taking the law into their own hands and doing things that the police are supposed to do. But I think he wants citizens and the community to play the role they can in, turning the needle back in a different direction in terms of why and how this stuff happens. And it's not the fault of the people who live in those neighborhoods that things are the way they are. But there is some responsibility to trying to fix it, to trying to help to fix that attitude that says it's okay. I mean, there is a certain attitude among these perpetrators that anything they do is all right, and that there aren't going to be consequences, or that the consequences don't matter. And that's
that people are terrified.
The bigger fear.
People are terrified of them, and so there's going to be no consequences, no repercussions. And I think that's what the chief is asking for. Stand up as a neighborhood, as a community, and say, not here.
All right, so is he getting buy-in from the neighborhood? Is he getting buy-in from the ministers and community groups?
Well, I hope he is. I mean, it was not all that a widespread group that stood up with him this week, and you had the same old naysayers like Charles Williams saying, well, he's got to join us, not us join him. That doesn't help anybody at a time like this. And
I mean, there are a lot of groups in the city, and there are a lot of people working on this problem from that community standpoint. You'd hope that they'd see something in a common interest with what the chief is talking about. Charles Williams actually is doing a lot of these things that you need to do to try to sew the community together in a way that this kind of thing is seen as unacceptable. I don't think it's great that he's, sniping at the chief about it.
Well, the relationship between Detroit police and residents is really the focus of the second chapter in the Detroit Journalism Cooperative's year-long project. And the DJC partners are examining whether conditions have improved in the city since the 1967 disturbances. So tonight, we're going to bring you Chief Craig's thoughts on police and community relations. Take a look.
When you look at and compare us to other cities that are struggling with their relationships in many areas of minority community, we're certainly seeing it. But I also welcome and look for opportunities to continue to keep dialogue open with key people in our communities. I understand and accept that for years there have been problems in police-community relationship. I accept it, I understand it, and yes, there have been changes, wholesale changes in many instances. We don't wait here in Detroit till something bad happens, and then all of a sudden I'm going to reach out and try to touch someone in hopes that we can resolve some issues. The building of trust starts from the very beginning. The tone of a police department certainly is set from the seat of the police chief. When I assumed command here some 2.5 years ago, I would tell you that police-community relations were at the bottom. People have lost confidence in this police department. The City of Detroit Police Department was under a consent decree for 13 years, the second longest running consent judgment in this country. Now, we look at what we've done with fewer officers, how we've restored trust and transparency. And I believe that the initiative, neighborhood police officers, has really made a difference in bridging that gap. We have fewer officers. We have better response times. We have a clearance rate that hovers around a national average. We've enhanced the neighborhood precinct model, 12 precincts functioning like small police departments that has a component of building relationships in the neighborhoods, that has patrol, the officers who go and respond to calls for service and handle emergency calls. And they're about the business of building relationships, and that does make a difference. The community has said in a resounding way, we're tired, we're fed up, and we're gonna fight with the police to eradicate violence in our city. We went into neighborhoods, enforced the law in a very strategic way, identified those who were creating problems in that neighborhood. And we're talking about shootings, we're talking about blatant drug dealing. You're talking about the Colony Arms apartment building and the Martin Luther King homes. So we went in with a large number of police officers. And here's the image that stands out for me. People cheering as we arrived. People applauding. One middle-aged woman came out, fell to her knees, looked up to the sky with both arms up, and said, "Thank God the Detroit police are here." That's how you build a capital of trust. And people say, we appreciate what the Detroit Police Department is doing for the neighborhoods. And that still continues to this day. One of the things that we're gonna be rolling out as part of enhancing our police-community relations is advisory boards at every precinct, so that the commander and captain can build the relationship, work on issues together in partnership at the neighborhood level. Also, certainly, our work with youth. If we don't work with our youth today, what does the future of Detroit look like? My dream for the city of Detroit is we continue to be the world leader that we are. How Detroit was sought out and touched and looked upon as a leader, as a model of policing excellence. It is my hope that we sustain it. That is my hope.
Our thanks to Chief Craig. Turning now to growth in downtown Detroit, prices and a potential high rise. First, housing prices. Midtown and downtown residential properties are going for big bucks. In Midtown, the average price has hit over $290,000. That's almost double from 2013. You're seeing about $300 a square foot in some places, and properties going for over the asking price. Did we ever think that we'd see this? I'm going to start with you, Stephen.
Well, no, I mean,
or this quickly, maybe.
This quickly, it is really fast. There are also a lot of, if you sort of scratch just beneath the surface, there are some problems lurking there. We still are at a 90-to-10 ratio mortgages to cash sales in the entire city. I would imagine that in these neighborhoods, that's probably even higher, 95, 100%, which means that the banks are not back loaning at the values that people think these things are worth. That's a serious issue for a number of reasons. One is that it locks a lot of people out of the market. And if you don't have $300,000, $400,000 cash in your pocket, you can't buy. That means middle-class families are, out of the question. But it also, it's an inflationary issue that all of this cash investment is great. But over the long term, what you need is sort of solid real estate market growth in all neighborhoods, and that's not really catching up quite the way this is. So the word bubble comes to mind a little bit, but if you say that right now in Detroit, you get strange stare. I mean, everyone's really excited about it, and they should be, but I think you gotta start to worry about some of these other dynamics and how they resolve themselves over the long term.
You have high demand and not a lot of inventory to pick from either, Nolan.
And that's the market. You've got more demand than you do have available houses. I think the good thing in Detroit, compared to some other places, is you've got a lot of property, a lot of land you can build new houses on, and you see a lot of proposals now in the works to put many more residential units in the city, particularly on that outskirts of downtown. And I think what you're going to see is a real housing building boom here over the next couple, 3 years. I talked to a guy the other night who's got some things planned in Corktown, and of course, Midtown's going crazy, and now even out Jefferson, people are taking a look. So
yeah, because that's what everyone's
spreading.
asking, if it's actually going to spread, or if it's just going to stay kind of in this contained
But you
area.
don't want what's going on downtown to spread. I mean, you don't want high cash sales to dominate the market, because that is going to squeeze out people of lower incomes or of middle incomes even, and it's going to squeeze out families. I mean, your average family does not have that kind of cash to buy a house with, and so we've got to figure out ways, and they're working on that, to get values up in a way that banks will recognize. Right now you've got all this excitement that's driving prices really high.
Yeah, and you're saying, well, who is it? Who's buying these places? Who are they?
I mean, a lot of them are people selling in other markets. I mean, if you sell a house in New York or Philadelphia or Washington right now, you could come away with that kind of cash, because the prices there are so high, and prices here are still relatively low. I mean, $300,000 for a condo in the central business district, you couldn't pay that in Washington right now, and live there. And so you've got people from other places doing it. You've got some wealthier people who just have cash like that to sink in, and it's all great. I'm not knocking any of that, but that's not real estate growth. It's not the kind of steady, healthy real estate growth that you need to grow the city. The city's not going to sustain itself on those kinds of people alone. It's got to get families involved especially in neighborhoods. And right now, if you're a family and wants to buy a house for $130,000 or $200,000 in a Detroit neighborhood, you have a problem getting a mortgage, not because of your financials, but because the house can't appraise what it's what it, and that's what's driving the cash sales, and that's not a long-term solution.
I want to turn to the larger question of downtown development, and a lot of news that's been coming out this week, into something that we actually never talk about on MiWeek, which is soccer. But everyone seems to be talking about soccer, the possibility of not only an MLS team coming to Detroit, but a stadium smack in downtown on the site of the new installed Wayne County Jail project. Also, Dan Gilbert got the green light for a high-rise new development on the Hudson site. So actually, it's a lot to talk about in terms of Dan Gilbert investment. Interesting, the press conference that happened on Wednesday, talking about the soccer coming and having their eyes on that site for the Wayne County Jail. Nolan, what struck you when you first heard about this and this billion-dollar investment?
I don't know
potentially.
Yeah, I think it's very exciting. I agree that that's the best use of that eastern entrance to downtown, sort of an entertainment district, something other than this grim criminal justice complex we have there now, and a half-complete jail. I was never in favor of finishing the jail if there was another alternative, but I haven't seen the money, and I haven't seen how the finances are going to work. The county's got about up to $200 million in that unfinished jail. You can't just walk away from that. It's going to take another $200 million to finish it, or perhaps more. They don't know where they're even going to get that money. And if you take that whole thing, pick it up and move it to Mound Road, the price goes up even further. So, I think it's wonderful to propose this development there, but the reality is the taxpayers can't pay for it. And if this stadium's going to replace the jail and the courthouses, private dollars are going to have to fund that investment.
You were not too thrilled with the announcement yesterday, or at least how it was presented. Why?
Well, I mean, number one, this is a negotiation that's been going on for some time. Robert Ficano reached out to Dan Gilbert at one point and said, hey, are you interested in this space? There was an offer that was made. The commission decided it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to do all the things that the county needed to do. They continue to sort of talk with the new executive, but then before there's any resolution at all, before there are hard numbers about what Gilbert is willing to commit or what it'll cost, he comes out with this huge splashy press conference promising this gleaming new stadium, which gets everybody all worked up about that idea, even though it may not be, as Nolan points out, it may not be a realistic solution unless Gilbert is willing to make up the gap in what the county has and what it will need if you're going to move everything out to Mound Road. Plus, Mound Road's not a great site for all of that stuff. I mean, it really is remote, and you need the reason. You go to any city in the country, the jail and the courthouse are in the central business district. That's in Boston, that's in Baltimore, Washington, Chicago. I mean, there's no place that we put it out in the middle of a neighborhood, and there are reasons for that. We need to talk about whether those reasons can be addressed in another way. But he's jumping the gun here as a way of putting pressure on the county to make it look like Warren Evans is standing in the wake of progress.
Yeah.
and
So
saying
what
he's not in favor.
choice does Warren Evans have here at this point?
Not many. I mean, if you look at the reality of the county's finances, I mean, they just staved off insolvency with this consent agreement, and a lot of hard work on behalf of on the part of Warren Evans to make the finances, to line the finances up. They don't have very much in the way of bonding room left to go out and build a huge new criminal justice complex. Their bond rating is still not great. It's inched up a little, but it's still not to the point where you'd go out and levy $300–400 million in bonds and be able to pay them off. The county has no money. And so if Gilbert Gores are going to build this thing, they're going to have to be prepared to come up with upwards of $200 million to make the county whole. I think that's the only way it works.
That's
now,
whole on that site. That's not even.
But it's not even
that's all
talking
on
about
that
doing an
side,
entirely different
but at
complex
least
someplace
it pays
else.
off those bonds and lets them start from scratch. And if they could get state backing for a bond sale to do the Mound Road site, I think you can make the deal work. But you've got to start by wiping out that $200 million that they're already in the hole for in this existing jail.
See, I think the county's position is, you can make us whole on that site, but we still need a jail, and we need a jail quickly. I mean, the conditions in the current jail are
We're going to have to spend that money
deteriorating, but they can't get it, and they can't go out and borrow. I think you're talking about upwards of $500 million if you're going to build an entire criminal justice complex out at Mound Road or anywhere else. That's not money that they're going to be able to access. I mean, he's going to have to pay for some of that if that's what he wants. And this was a way yesterday of sort of saying, well, you'll get this $1 billion investment, and I'm not going to address all these other problems. I'm not going to talk about all these other issues that need to be resolved. It really was.
I think we've learned, though, you don't want to really underestimate him when he gets a notion in his head. You know, they may make this work. I mean, the county's going to have to build a new.
He has the money. He can pay for it.
The county's going to have to build a new courthouse eventually, anyway, within the next 2 to 3 years. That whole complex.
It's a massive investment.
But I mean, so you can't really put that on this project. That cost is going to be incurred anyway. They're going to have to finish the jail. That's going to cost them $200 to $300 million. That's whether, no matter what happens, county's going to have to come up with that money from someplace. I don't think Evans has figured.
I mean, the deal that they're
but I think that you have to take that in consideration, because the knock has been all along that people haven't had the foresight for long-term planning when it comes to this. So I think that you do have to take that into consideration.
The deal they're trying to put together, I mean, they're in a really precarious position. They cannot borrow a lot more money. The deal has got to address that $150 million that they've already done. They think they can get access to finish on that site, to money to finish that site. That's anything more, then Gilbert should open up his wallet and pay for it.
They should consider a turnkey deal on that site. Let a contractor finish it and lease the place back. Because I'm with you. I don't think they're going to be able to borrow that money.
And people love soccer around here.
Yeah, they
right?
do. They do.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with what he's talking about, except that you'd have 4 stadiums.
But when you look at that, and the other stadiums that taxpayers have funded, they were proven products. Soccer's not a proven product in terms of its viability.
All right, we'll fight about soccer another day. It's time for headlines. All right, as we wrap up the show tonight, 2 things that we want to get to, and the first of them is a sad note this week. Paul Wellday, who is a friend of MiWeek, and if you follow politics in this town, you know who he is. He was just on our pre-primary show just a couple of weeks ago. He passed away this week, GOP strategist, and a good guy that people from both sides of the aisles really had a touchstone with.
Yeah, I mean, he was all class. Paul was a gentleman, easy to work with. He was bright. He was one of the smartest political strategists, I think, in this state. He was square with you when you interviewed him. He didn't, he didn't twist and turn, and he was always civil.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's not somebody I agreed with on a whole lot of things, but I considered him a friend, and that's rare.
Yeah. All right, and finally tonight, apparently they're giving radio shows to everyone these days. Stephen, I'm not talking about your show at all. I'm not talking about you. But Todd Corser just announced this week he's got a radio show, which I think is really interesting, seeing he's running for office at this time. Nolan, are you going to be a guest on that show?
I am not. I'll assure you I am not going to be a guest on that show.
What do you think about that, Stephen?
Well, I mean, more voices, that's a good thing. I'm a little curious about the model over at this station where, like, everybody from Todd Corser to Robert Fricano has a show, but whatever, it's the marketplace, the media marketplace. We'll sort it all out, right?
Next, Nolan, do you think you'll get a show? I mean,
I'm hoping not. But
hoping not?
This is about all I can handle right here.
And something that we're going to be watching for next week, President Obama is heading to Flint. So we'll be watching for his visit next week. And that's going to do it. Thanks so much, guys. That is going to do it for my week. Thanks so much for joining us. Next week, we're hitting the road for a live 1-hour special, taking a closer look at Detroit's neighborhoods. And we hope that you join us for that special broadcast. You can find out more at MiWeek.org and on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm Christy McDonald. Have a great night. We'll see you next time for My Week. Take care.
Did you know? Gordon Food Service was started by a 23-year-old entrepreneur as a butter and egg delivery business more than a century ago. In 1948, school teacher Gerard Wendell Hayworth borrowed $10,000 from his parents to start a woodworking operation in his family's garage. It's now Hayworth Incorporated. These are just some of the ways Michigan's pioneers started out as small companies with big ideas.
We are business leaders for Michigan. We are committed to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and a healthy economy. Funding is also provided by Delta.